Funny story. So, I grew up performing. I grew up doing magic. We grew up on stage. We were always in Waikiki, always had a show. My dad had a TV show. So I was just very comfortable in front of cameras. I was comfortable in front of people. And so like kind of growing up, seeing the background, especially in his TV show, seeing like the behind the scenes of filming and the editing process, I always just like liked it. And one of our stagehands for our show, he was a student at Moanaloa. He's probably 7 or 8 years older than me. And so he was a student at Moanaloa. And I remember when I was like in elementary, middle school, like he was in the Menimac program at Moanaloa. So like every time like he would come and set up, like we would set up for the show, we would have like some downtime before the show started, and he would be on his computer editing. And so I would just like always like be watching him thinking like, hey, that's super cool. But I lived in Eva Beach. And so like, I was like, you know what, when I go to Moanaloa, like I want to be in that program. Well, little did I know, like my electives were going to be taken up with like orchestra, because that was like the only way that I could come to Moanaloa. So in middle school, I went to Moanaloa Middle. I was in their orchestra. Moanaloa High School, like I really wanted to do Menimac, but my parents were like, no, you got to stay in orchestra because like this is your GE. And so I stayed in orchestra my freshman year. I was in orchestra, and I was just like, man, I just really want to be in the media program, but I didn't know how to get in. And so one day, that same stagehand that was in Menimac, he's in college now, and he was like, he asked me if I could act in his kind of like college competition film. So I was like, sure. So me and my brother, we acted in his film. That film ended up winning. And so because he was the previous student of the Menimac teachers here, at the award ceremony, the teachers went, they watched his film, they saw it won, and one of the teachers just so happened recognized me from the film and was like, I think that kid goes to our school. And so the next day, we had like an assembly. I don't know what assembly it was, but I was walking up like these long stairs by the gym, and Miss Calistro, who was a Menimac teacher, was walking right behind me. And she was like, hey, you're the boy. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you're the boy in the film. And like, I'm like, what are you talking about? Because we did this film, like the film was like during the summer, and this was already during the school year, and they finally like won and had all this awards. So I totally kind of forgot about it. And you're like, you were in Tyler's film. I was like, oh yeah, I helped with that film. She's like, why aren't you in media? I was like, I would love to be in media, but I'm in orchestra. And she's like, you know what? Like, come with me right now. So she took me right to the principal's office. And she's like, we need this kid in media. And the principal was like, well, like, why? He's like, well, and then she explained the whole thing. And so right there, he signed over my papers for the next school year. So sophomore year, so this was, the principal was Mr. Galera. So this was the principal right before Miss Martin. And he signed me over into Menimac. I wasn't just in Menimac, he put me in acting. And so I was in acting and in Menimac. And my sophomore year, I remember getting my schedule, and I saw that I wasn't just in acting in Menimac, I was in advanced acting and advanced media. And I'm like, I want to be in these programs, but I had zero experience with either. I just liked it. I didn't even touch a camera before getting into the class. As far as acting, I acted in my friend's film, but like it wasn't like, I've never had any other like acting experience. So I remember just like faking my way through like half the year. And my media teacher was my acting teacher, so he saw me a lot, like in the day. And like somewhere in the first quarter, second quarter, like he realized like this kid probably like doesn't have any background. Cause like I'm just, like I would be the one, and I'm just a very like relational person and like very like team oriented, like team builder. So like anytime we had an assignment, like I would just delegate and like not, because I don't know what to do. So it would be like, hey, we have this film project. And I'd be like, hey, Trevor, can you set up the tripod and camera, please? Because I wouldn't know how to do it. And so he finally caught on. So I remember, and I'll end it with this story, but I remember the very first time that I realized, hey, this is something that I really love, was the first project that like he just threw me under, my teacher threw me under the bus. Like he threw me into the deep end. So he kind of caught on. And so little did I know, he had a meeting with the whole class without me knowing. So like I don't know where I was that day. But he met with the whole class, and my class was all upperclassmen. I was a sophomore, and most of them were like seniors, some juniors. And he was like, hey, like, I want to really test Landan to see what he knows. So like whatever, like if he asks you to do something, don't do it. Like just like have him do it. And so I get in class like the next day, and he assigns me a directing position. So he said, hey, we're going to do this short film. It's going to be his story, but Landon, you're directing it. So I was like, all right, cool, right? And so he's like, all right, set up a 3-point lighting system. I was like, cool. Hey, Noah, can you set up a 3-point lighting system? He's like, oh, no, Landon, you got it. And I'm like, what? I don't know how to set up a 3-point lighting system. So I'm just setting up 3 lights. Like that's all like I could get out of that statement, like 3-point lighting system. So I put up 3 lights, totally not what it was supposed to be. And then he asked this question. He said, hey, Landon, can you go get the and this is probably the wrong term because I still don't use this term. But he says the C-37s. It was something like that. And I'm like, okay, like let me get the C-37s. So I would go to my classmates like, hey, what's a C-37? It's like, no, you got to figure it out, man. And so like I'm bringing my teacher like all these random things like, hey, C-37? He's like, no, that's not it. And all to find out, like at the end of it, a C-37 was just a clothespin. Like it was the media term for clothespin. And I was so frustrated because I was like, just say clothespin. Like why aren't you just talking English? And so like this whole thing, so I finally like confessed to him, like, look, I don't know what I'm doing. And so like he brought the class together. He's like, all right, we got to support Landon. And so like as you're, like don't just do stuff for him, like kind of teach him through it. So they taught me a 3-point lighting system for that film. I was kind of learning all these different terms, and I'm just like trying to, like it was just like drinking from a fire hose. But that film that I directed for that year ended up winning Best Visual Effects in the entire nation that year. And so like after that, I was like, hey, maybe this is something that I'm actually kind of good at. And so I kind of just really dug in and really learned it and got really well at it. That carried over through my whole kind of high school career. I ended up winning a bunch of other things.